Welcome to Next Round with me, Dale McDermott.
And me, David W. Higgins.
A young Irish look at the economy, politics and society.
Covering home and abroad.
For the thinkers, the dreamers and the doers, this is Next Round. Hello and welcome to the latest episode of Next Round. Today we have a number of topics we'd like to discuss with you, and with the Olympics in Paris coming to a close this week, our conversation today is somewhat Olympic themed. The first thing we want to talk about is headlines would have been seen by many people during the week and during the month, where we saw Olympians were also on OnlyFans. So one of the things we want to discuss and explore today is the topic of OnlyFans, its impact on society and the economics behind it. Stemming from that, we also want to talk about Ireland's Olympic ambitions, with Ireland having the most successful Olympics in its history. We are now striving for gold, or at least by hosting the Olympics, says Senator Malcolm Byrne, in 2072, which might seem like a long time away. So is this a sign of Ireland's delayed ambition, or is this spurring debate for Ireland to aim really high? And Ireland is also very much at peace, at least with respect to industrial relations. David has some figures which he'd like to cover and explore. So if you do like this podcast, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel and our various platforms that we're on. You can also watch us on YouTube. We really appreciate, of course, the support that you've given us over these past few months. So with that, I think let's dive into our conversation. And the first thing we want to talk about...
Dale, is dive in a reference to the British diver who was on OnlyFans?
Yes, you've caught me out there, actually. So OnlyFans, David, I think some of our listeners and viewers might actually be aware of this topic, but I think it's one which I think is of real importance for discussion, because so many topics on the social side of our podcast, David, I think stem from this and touch upon it. I think first of all, let's talk about what is OnlyFans. It is a subscription-based platform which has been primarily known for adult content, and it has grown since its founding. And I think it's 2016 is when it was founded. But basically, just to dive through some of the impact, first of all, on the economics, and then let's talk about how it's used and its wider impact as well. So it's seen significant growth, but primarily from COVID-19, when we were all put into our virtual worlds, where by 2022, the company OnlyFans, its gross revenues exceeded $5 billion, driven by millions of creators and subscribers. On a transaction volume perspective, its business model basically is OnlyFans is the platform, and it takes a percentage cut, about 20%, of the earnings made by the content creators. To give you a size of the scale of this, in 2021, about $2 billion was processed by OnlyFans in that year alone in payments to creators, with OnlyFans, of course, getting about 20% of that. And profitability, it's a very profitable business model. Low overheads, high transaction volumes equates to significant profits, with over $900 million in net revenue for 2021, reflecting a strong financial performance. So a strong business model and a strong business proposition. But what I was surprised to see is, and you referenced this with the diving in comment, was the amount of Olympians who are using this platform. And the reason they're using this is to subsidize and fund their Olympic dreams. Now, many Olympians have been claiming that, this is really important for them to make ends meet, for them to survive, for them to sustain their Olympic dreams and to make it a reality, because many athletes are barely able to pay rent, is something which is widely quoted in media publications. We move then just to turn towards why I think this is a really important societal question. And I think it's something as well that certainly gives me pause. And I think that we should give ourselves pause when we see Olympians doing this. And the reason I think that's important, David, is because if we think of Olympians, lots of young people look up to Olympians. What they do, what they say has effect and has resonance with many people across the world. And if we think of, for example, the amount of people, young people, especially in Gen Z, who want to become, let's say, influencers, around 57% of Gen Zers in the US have said that is the choice that they want to have as a career, is to be an influencer. And if we think of the amount of people who are actually on OnlyFans, for adults aged between 18 and 45, which is effectively nearly all of the users of the OnlyFans website, those who are aged 18 to 45 comprise more than a third of the US population, or let's say just shy of 120 million people in total. And again, very roughly saying, this means that we can deduce that about 2% of American women aged 18 to 45 are actually using OnlyFans as content creators, which is different to about 1% of men doing the same. But then if we look at the actual demand side, so those who are actually using OnlyFans, nearly half, according to OnlyFans, nearly half of its 220 million users worldwide are American, therefore about 94 million people. And considering that over 87% of users are male, we can assume that that's about 82 million men. 3/4 of them are reportedly in the 18 to 45 bracket. So huge numbers using it from a demand perspective.
Wow. So just to break that apart, Dale. So you're saying that about, if there's 100 men in a room, American men, one in one of those 100 have an OnlyFans account where they're putting up content.
Correct.
And then a much more sizable chunk of them are actually consumers, are actually going in and having an account and maybe not paying, because some of these things free, but no, at least they're consuming it.
I believe it's mostly it's a subscription based service. So I think that there's free trials, or I'm not a user, just to clarify that as well. I'm using this from secondary sources, etc. But I think, David, why is this important, and why are we even discussing this? I think there's a few things, first of all, I want to talk about. The first is, this is yet another sign of the financial pressures facing young people all across the world. We now have Olympians who are struggling, or so they say, to make ends meet and subsidize and make their Olympic dreams a reality. That gives me pause. The second thing is more on the societal implications, where Olympians are role models and people look up to them, especially young people. Mm-hmm. And if we're seeing this happen, I just wonder how many young people are then going to see this as a quick, as a way to make a quick dollar, while neglecting to think about the longer term implications for their careers, and wider implications. So,
one major long-term thing, so this is said not so much about OnlyFans, but about the wider porn industry, that there are actors who go into the porn industry who are very happy to have their stuff online in their 20s, and then when they come out of the industry in their later years, they very much struggle to go into other fields of work, and they have the constant cloud hanging over them that when people search their name, all they're getting are the results for their pornography. And I imagine that risk is out there for athletes. So athletes also have a prime essentially, which is the years where they are athletes, and then going into their 40s and 50s, they have to find other careers and other fields to go into. Now, some of the very successful athletes can remain ambassadors and various other things through the decades, but many can't. So you're talking about that risk whereby you probably take out an account, put content up thinking that it'll buttress your income, being an athlete in your younger years, and then in your later years you may struggle to find better corporate work, a more stable job, because anyone who looks you up is going to see, yes, you were an Olympic athlete, but also you had an OnlyFans.
Exactly, yeah. And I think it's, one of the questions which comes to mind is regulation. Where is regulation on this? Because if you have, and I'm sure some people watching this might think this isn't a risk. Why is this even a topic of conversation? But it's extremely prevalent in younger society. And I think with the allure of easy income, I saw Olympians talking about how the fact that they're making, 2, 3, 4 times what they're making from on OnlyFans and what they would for, let's say, sponsorship or even just subsidized payments, which they get from being part of an Olympics team. That message cascades down to fans and to younger people.
Yeah.
And then again, I referenced the stat there: 57% of young people in America want to be influencers. Again, that allure of that lifestyle where free things, sponsorship, shiny, etc. What does that mean then for other ambitions, for other careers in our economy? And
yes,
so that's.
Do we know if any Irish athletes of the Olympic squad are on OnlyFans?
I don't.
Okay, that would be very Irish, though, wouldn't it? It's like, we're not doing that.
Yeah,
because
yeah.
Mary down the street, would hear about it, and it'd be said amongst the neighbours, and that's too small town Ireland.
Exactly. The curtains twitching as they're walking down the high street in the town. But I think, David, I'm curious how you I know, what do you think about the regulation side of this as well? This topic, and we saw with the Taoiseach, Simon Harris, calling for an AI and social media regulation summit to discuss how do we regulate social media. This is a piece of social media which I think is not actually getting the headlines it deserves until more recently. Thank you, Olympians, for raising it. And the possible damage it can do.
Yeah, well, a key part of any regulation, this is again more an porn industry topic, but it kind of relates to OnlyFans as well, is about age verification.
Yeah.
Because anything that's even softcore or even hardcore typically has an age restriction. And the model that we currently have is very much kind of tick a box while entering a site. It's like, oh, yes, I am over 18. And if it was just tick a box to buy alcohol online, I think a lot of young people under 16 would tick, oh yeah, I am over 18, and would tick the box, and then we know what would happen then. And this is where some states in the US now are beginning to effectively block the likes of Pornhub by requiring much more stringent age verification. And that could be the way that we go for the wider suite of adult content. I think broadly, I would actually welcome that. I mean, the ability to access all kinds of harmful, what is harmful? I mean, pornographic content from very young ages because of the accessibility of smartphones is very much a challenge. And look, you're never going to eliminate these things entirely because people will always find a way around them. But
why make it easy?
Making it more difficult. Yeah. That's it. Yeah, you make it more difficult, and then it's harder for people to actually go more thoroughly after it. But the other question that does come to mind to me is, well, so proving the kind of real harms of consuming, and I am talking more about consuming here. I know we're talking about producing content, which the Olympians are doing. That's one challenge. The other is actually consuming it. I've always struggled to find, robust and kind of definitive data that says yes, the consumption of pornography, in moderate levels, actually is harmful downstream. Now, there's very good evidence that like people who end up being like addicted to porn and all that kind of stuff is really harmful to your relationships and can be actually financially damaging. Some people can put ridiculous amounts of money behind these things, and OnlyFans, of course, is actually a paid subscription, so some people will end up doing that. But part of the reason I think why we haven't gone near these things in recent time, or at least in past decades, and we've kind of been saying, look, porn industry's going and it's no big deal, is because proving definitively the kind of the average user is being harmed by this is just something that's been very hard to do.
Yeah, and so I think my view is actually that a real risk here is actually on the creator side, though. Where I think consumption was one thing, and yes, I think there's lots of evidence where excessive use is obviously quite bad for you, but also I think exposure to a wider range of types of pornography as well, that's shown effect. I mean, increase in misogyny, in terms of people's behaviors, etc. Like,
this is like your Andrew Tate stuff.
You get exposed to bad stuff, and that can influence how one then acts in their own life, which I think is a real negative and a real cause for pause as well. Yeah. On the creator side, just to finish the point, on the creator side, the reason this is different is because for a young person, let's say in Ireland, to enter the porn industry, how would that even happen? Right? You would need to probably go to LA and find the adult industry somehow. My point there is very difficult. Now you can do it from the comfort of your bedroom, with no checks or balances, and no one actually really even knowing that you're doing it, and getting significant income for and therefore being financially rewarded for that as well, especially if your OnlyFans takes off. That's a problem, I think. And I think this issue, and I think the reason it's a problem is I think a lot more people are doing it than anyone who's in politics or anyone who's in policy decision responsibility recognizes.
Well, that's it. Yeah, like you've cited the numbers there very cleverly to show that actually it's a decent percentage of the population. I mean, there was that saying, I think back in the 70s and 80s in Ireland, like, well, no one was having sex in Ireland before then, and that was imbued with topics around contraception and abortion and all these topics. So yeah, there could be a head in the sand approach from policymakers to say, well, it's not such a big deal, it's not that prevalent. But actually, the usage statistics on these websites very much show that it is.
Exactly. So, look, I think it's an interesting debate and discussion. It's one I thought warranted a conversation today. I put a tweet out during the week, and I saw it caused a lot of debate, so I thought I might as well just air my thoughts here today. But keeping on our Olympic theme, David, moving away from OnlyFans, let's talk about Ireland's ambition, or delayed ambition, as some people have recalled, where Senator Malcolm Byrne, the Fianna Fáil senator, has called for Ireland to host the Olympics. The caveat being the date is 2072, so a long time away. Yeah. And I saw some reactions during the week where people, the immediate reaction I saw from people was that, how Irish is this? Let's aim high, but let's aim far away. But I actually came to the defense of Malcolm Byrne, because I thought, on the point he was making was that, 2072, first of all, would be about the 150th anniversary of Ireland partaking in the Olympics as a sovereign country. And it was also the case of, it gives us time to dream big. What critical infrastructure do we need to have in place to actually give us a real chance of competing on the world stage, to host, or most likely co-host, the Olympics, if that's possible, with another country. And this brings the wider point as well, which is tied to this, David, which is the whole idea around how Ireland builds things. What do we like with our critical infrastructure? Metrolink, for example, the underground subway from Dublin Airport to the city centre is one which is often cited as being, we've spent 150 million euro on that without putting a shovel in the ground. And of course, the National Children's Hospital, which has, seen hundreds of millions of euro in overspend and delayed delivery time as well. So, David, I'm going to ask you, first of all, do you think 2072 is a delayed ambition or a real one that we should strive for?
Yeah, I think you wouldn't be able. I think a country like Ireland wouldn't be able to host it until at least that decade. And why do I say that? When I look through the list of host cities through the past on the Olympics, you're talking about cities that are in very large countries. So working in reverse, France, several million there, Japan, Tokyo, a country of over 100 million, Brazil, a country of a quarter billion. Rio de Janeiro in 16, and then you get to London, you go back to Beijing. You'd have to go to Athens in Greece, 2004, to find a smaller country hosting it. But of course, Greece
Of course,
was where the
that's where it
Olympics
came from.
was birthed. So they were very much
Yeah.
due to host it. They were keen to do it for those very cultural
Sure.
and historic reasons. And then I start going back through the decades, and the last time I can see smaller countries hosting it, or countries as small as Ireland, I see Melbourne and Stockholm, a joint one, Australia and Sweden in 1956, and then Helsinki and Finland in
Australia
1952.
and Sweden. How did
Yeah,
that work?
I don't know actually. It seems that they jointly hosted it. It was it was across two countries. I don't know the details of how that.
Let's say the jet lag was strong for that one, perhaps.
Sorry, Dale. I have the caveat here. It was actually Melbourne mostly,
Okay.
except the equestrian events, the horse racing ones, which were held in Stockholm.
Okay, so it was too warm.
So
Too warm for the horses, maybe.
it might have been. It might have been. Yeah.
Okay.
Dale, have you been following the discourse around, horse racing and greyhounds versus the Olympics?
No. What's
Well, it's just it. Yeah, so look, it's lit up. It's a thing that lights up on Twitter every now and then, and it goes something like this: oh, we're spending 80, 90 million euros in horse racing, 20 million on greyhounds. We should put that money behind
Sure.
our athletes. Well, look, I don't think you need to actually push down one other sport to fund another. There are actually three equestrian categories in the Olympics. So funding horses. If you want to fund the Olympic medals, you're going to need to fund those ones.
And those are categories where Ireland tends to do pretty well in as well, right?
Yes, we were close to a medal in some of them. But just to talk about the numbers, because this came up just on radio about have we gotten bang for our buck for our medals. We spent 60 million in the last Tokyo round, and we spent 90 million on athletes in this round. But our millions per medal was 15 million because we got 4 medals in the last Olympics. We got 7 in this one. So we're actually spending 12 million. So it pays good returns to fund your athletes, right? But funding to host the Olympics typically doesn't come with the best return.
Yeah.
So when Athens, a small country, plugged lots of money behind hosting the Olympics, they have a whole bunch of infrastructure now which just isn't being used.
Sure.
Which was you have to raise your infrastructure on the sporting side, not just to be one that can host your own nation's athletes in regular times. It's about having a very large velodrome, for example, that will get used for events and will have enough seating capacity to hold a decent Olympic event that'll be global. But then outside those few weeks of the Olympics, do you have the usage in these facilities for your domestic athletes? And it's fine to say, build it and they'll come. But I'd be much more keen to invest in infrastructure that builds our athletes to then go abroad and kick ass in the Olympics, rather than building a whole bunch of extra infrastructure and seating capacity for a global audience to come to Ireland, which then may lie destitute in the 2080s and the 2090s and the decades after 2072.
And this is the thing, I think, again, if you're a smaller country and you've got a huge stadium or multiple stadiums across the country, lots of them just won't be used, especially in Ireland, a population of 5 million people. we just don't have the critical mass to make that a reality. What might make more sense, though, of course, is to partner. And perhaps this would be a nice example or way for Ireland and the UK, perhaps, to co-host together. Of course, the UK had it in 2012 and did a very good job at it as well, I might add. But perhaps that...
Do it with Belfast.
Do it with Belfast.
Yeah.
I think you still have the problem, though, with kind of scale and, the problem thereafter. But again, I think for the likes of Northern Ireland, actually, that might be a nice economic incentive to spur investment and drive investment into a part of the UK and Ireland that really has not seen much investment over the last number of decades and has seen that problem face it. But and
there are ways to do it on the cheap as well. So the Paris Olympics was one of the cheapest Olympics to host in recent times. I think you'd have to go back to Athens to see cheaper Olympics, even on an inflation adjusted basis. So I think Beijing was something like 6 or 8 times the cost to host. And then even London was maybe twice, I think, what Paris was to host. The French did it on the cheap. Partly they had decent infrastructure to begin with. But take, for example, their handball or volleyball. It was just in front of the Eiffel Tower. They just took a green space and built up temporary stands to host it. So if you don't build a big permanent capacity and you're just setting up temporary stuff, that can cut down the cost.
And I think even to go even more temporary, 2072, I mean, it'll probably be in the cloud by then. So maybe we'll all be just tuning into our Apple Provision headsets and kind of just zoning out.
They'll be like Minecraft and Roblox will be a big categories, right? That's the way it's going.
But like, I thought the reaction though to Malcolm Byrne's suggestion, I thought it was just a bit short-sighted for many people. Like I think we need people, especially in our politics, to dream big and have vision, to push us to do things that we haven't thought about. And 2072 is a long way away, but I think we need to dream big and think of these big projects. And I'm just glad that someone in our political system is kind of thinking like this and thinking big and pushing us to be for it.
I mean, it's worth remembering that Ireland hosted the Special Olympics those years ago, and there's still a great legacy from that. Signposts across many towns in Ireland talking about how they were hosting athletes from different countries. Maybe doing a round of that again could be something to do. It did cross my mind, there's also the Winter Olympics, and we are cold, but we're actually not icy cold enough for that. So let's keep that off the radar for that.
I think if there's a rainy Olympics or some equivalent sports that require wet and wind,
an overcast
Olympics, that might be a better one. But I think then, just moving on from our Olympics theme, the other piece we want to talk about is industrial relations in Ireland. And we are at peace, David, if I understand things correctly.
Yeah, so there's the CSO released quarterly numbers on industrial disputes. And if I was to ask you, so industrial dispute is, workers in a firm, in a company, have an issue, and a dispute is where it gets to basically the level of it being a strike. And there's metrics on the number of workers who get caught up by this and days lost, right? So, days lost is where
strikes,
people are out on picket lines, that sort of strikes, that sort of thing. If I was to say to you how many disputes began in the, do I have the right numbers here? If I was to say to you how many disputes began in the fourth quarter last year, how many disputes would you say that there were?
And just so I know, these are disputes between, is it any company and its workers? Is that kind of
across all sectors of the economy? How many? Would you say?
I would think, it could be 50, 60. I'd imagine.
It was one.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
So we are at peace.
Yeah. Yeah, and so that was Q4 last year. How many was in the first quarter this year?
I don't know.
One.
Okay.
How many was in the second quarter of this year?
I'm going to say one again, is it?
Yeah, it was one. Okay. Yeah, you can see the pattern.
And I'm wondering, is it the same company as well?
Well, so there's a separate metric on that, which is how many disputes are ongoing.
Sure.
I don't have that to hand, but I think it shows a similar
Yeah.
number. The one dispute that isn't caught in this, I believe, is the Aer Lingus
Right.
dispute, which would have been in Q3
And that would
because
have
that was
got
through.
so much media attention as well. It obviously affected a large portion of the population as well looking to travel. Yeah.
Yes, yeah, and like when I saw the Aer Lingus one come along, I thought, "Ooh, is this going to be a sign that there is a desire amongst workers to catch up because of cost of living, and that people will get to the level of industrial disputes to make it happen?" That was a big fear I had coming into the cost of living when initially we had the energy spike at the start of 2022, and it hasn't materialized. And maybe it's just important to give a bit of color about how bad industrial disputes have been in the
Mm-hmm.
past. So, like, if you look at all of last year, even though the number of firms with disputes was just 19, days lost to strike was 4,200. So there would have been even last year some ongoing ones that were losing a lot of days in total across the economy. But if you go back, so I said 4,000, if you go back to the year 1985, it was 400,000 days lost throughout the year 1985. That's when the records here begin, at least in my screen. And that tells you that we used to have a much more fraught landscape of industrial disputes where labor unions were more prevalent in the economy, and where people felt, look, okay, I need to stand up to my employer to get my wage increase. Now we're kind of more partnership driven. Like, I've never seen so many kind of link ups between business organizations and unions saying, look, hey, we're partners in these areas and we're going to try and figure this through. And it does speak to a better way of handling it. But I do think that the higher cost of living issues, even though they've gone away for now, if they resurface and we've a couple more persistent years of higher than typical inflation, we may see a tick up in the level of industrial disputes. I think you're also seeing a return to higher economic power. So, Dale, if I was to ask you, so there's trade unions are huge in America, they're big in the US. And if I was to ask you, prior to this year, when was the last time that a trade union leader spoke to the Republican convention?
Never.
Never. Okay. Okay. So it was the 1980s.
Okay.
I forget which election, but I think one of the Reagan elections, there were trade unions that were actually endorsing Reagan, which again you'd think, gosh, surely trade unions are all Democrat, and they have been in recent times. They have been Democrat in recent times. But a remarkable thing happened at the GOP convention this year. Everyone was talking about Trump and he had gotten shot, and that was the big thing. But no Irish media picked up that a man by the name of Sean O'Brien,
Very Irish name.
a very Irish name, yeah, a big Irish American guy from
Yeah.
Boston, right? So he was a truck driver. His father was a truck driver. His great grandfather, they're all truck drivers. And with the Irish American heritage, he became the leader of the Teamsters Union. Teamsters Union has like 1.5 million members.
Big, yeah.
They would be your UPS delivery drivers, for example, are all Teamsters. They'd be in healthcare. They'd be in public sector union representation, right? Big, broad set of union reps. They're in Canada as well. They're a North American organization. Sean O'Brien spoke at a keynote address with Trump sitting in the audience to the to the GOP convention for the first time in decades. And it speaks to the fact that union workers, blue collar workers, are now much more competitive in the US. That's also the case in the UK because of the red wall and because of reform and this idea that the working man, the kind of the white van driver, is a competitive voter. When that becomes the case, I think wage growth and kind of looking after low income workers' interests are much more salient.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where you probably get more inflation, but you probably also get more disputes because effectively you're kind of speaking to those voters and saying, hey, look, your interests matter. If you need to fight against your employer for higher wages, we're not going to, there's no kind of prevailing ideology like there was during the Thatcher years to say, actually, no, unions are bad. We're going to put down strikes and we're going to get rid of strikes as being a big problem.
Yeah, but I think also, I mean, just some reactions there would be I think, first of all, you had kind of those structural reforms in the economy that were being made as well, in terms of like focusing on certain sectors, closing down certain sectors, especially the miners in the UK. But I think, I'm not. I think it's interesting to see that difference from the 80s, where you had as you referenced, 400,000 compared to now more recently. And I think part of that, of course, is the state putting in mechanisms for labor relations dispute resolution.
And the Labour Court.
And the Labour Court, the Workplace Relations Commission, other areas such as, minimum wage pay, holidays, equality within workers' rights as well. All of those kind of gave minimum acceptable standards, which I think probably dampened the need to be constantly striking. But again, I think those collective bargaining mechanisms and collective dispute mechanisms as well being introduced, I think probably gave a more formalized method to resolve these before having to actually go out on strike as well, because a strike is a failure of discussions, right?
Yeah, it's a good point there. And the other thing I'd add is that because the economy of the 1980s and prior decades was more industrial, i.e., it was more manufacturing and industry, and farmers were a bigger thing too. You had a smaller services sector, and because you now have a larger services sector in Ireland, UK, and other countries, the management in those firms are marginally better at managing these things. So take for example the tech sector. Like, the one thing that we know about the tech sector is they're great at giving free perks in the office and a good canteen, and they've ways of like making people's
the
kind of
snack
standard
pantry
of working
is full.
This kind of thing.
Yeah.
This is the thing, guys. We're getting pizza for the office. Make sure they come down.
I
to the
will
canteen.
say I have used those pantries and they're very good. So.
Oh yeah. You can't beat good free food in work. But you do see jokes online about kind of I'd love my firm to help out with my mental health, but
free
all
pizza.
They're doing is giving me free pizza. This kind of this is very much a meme.
Yeah.
But So look, for that reason, I think structurally you're right. There's probably reasons why we're not going to see an explosion in these things. But certainly a notch up that I had expected has not materialized. And it might take another big whack of inflation, if it were to come along, to actually lead to more fraught union relations.
Also interesting as well, I think, is you referenced the tech sector there. Sure, no one in tech is in a union either. I think people. In people's disputes kind of happen now with themselves more so. The market probably affects it as well, and. I think work is also a lot more transient now as well, right? The whole idea of a job for life and you're staying there, so therefore those standards are really important. I think what's happening now, and again, this is all dependent on the economy going pretty well, where if you aren't really happy with your situation, well, you can just pack up and leave and get another job somewhere else, by and large.
Yeah, and that culture is a little more widely accepted by workers too, which probably makes them less likely to take up a dispute within an existing firm when many of them may have their eyes on moving firm as a way to get ahead. And that speaks to some good data that there's out there on wage increases. Yep. So people who are movers, who move between jobs, tend to have a higher wage growth level than stayers. And it reflects the fact that you're willing to put yourself out there. You're going to try and go for higher positions in other firms. And that regularity of moving around can notch your wages higher vis-a-vis staying. So there aren't enough stayers in firms to actually, ignite an industrial dispute because people are more willing to move.
Exactly. Fascinating. And I think with that, we are out of time for this week. So again, thank you everyone for listening to us and watching us. If you did like this podcast, again, would remind you to please like us, please subscribe to us, and please share this podcast to your friends. We really appreciate your support. We're also available on YouTube where you can watch us and subscribe to our YouTube channel. But thanks again for listening and watching, and look forward to chatting to you again next week. Take care. Bye-bye.